community perspective. It's just, what I'm hoping to do is open our eyes around how we view things. And if you put the two side by side, a quick hearing culture perspective would be that she's smarter than he is. Because inherently, we attach intelligence to spoken English skills. I used to have a slide that said the things people say. And people have come up to me over the years. Corey and I have been together for 18 years. And people have come up to us and spoken in front of him, about him, to me. So here are some of the ones that I find funny. Can he read? Can he drive? I've heard deaf mutes can be smart. I have, this is actually one of my favorite ones. I tell this story before. When we first moved to the Seattle area, we just happened to go to a restaurant, like a kind of a fast food restaurant, frequently as we were moving in and everything. And it just was easier because the menu was so far away for him to tell me what he wanted and for me to order for him. So I'll never forget, I went in independently. So we'd gone a couple times together. I went in independently, maybe a couple weeks later, and the woman at the counter was like, "Your friend who comes in with you, he came in and ordered all by himself." Oh, no. Way to go, Corey. At 35 years of age, you can order a taco. You know? And people are well-intentioned, and they're being kind, and I'm not trying to not acknowledge that. But I think the deaf community is one of the few communities where people still speak a lot before they think, right? And let me tell you one other story about this. This was a number of years ago. We were at a bed and breakfast in Santa Barbara, back when bed and breakfasts were still popular. And we were having a lovely time. And Corey had gone into the room to rest for a little while. So I was chatting with another couple who were out in kind of the main area. Then he came out, and he picks up the paper and he's reading it, the newspaper. They asked me, "How did you guys meet?" I said, "We met at University." He was an undergraduate, I was a master's student. So we're chatting some more, and he's reading the paper and kind of looking up, and I'm interpreting and catching the conversation. Then he was hungry, and he went into the kitchen. And the second he left, the guy who we had been chatting with says to me, "So can he read?" And normally I'm educate, educate, educate. And I have to say, I said, "Can you?" Do you think he was just looking at the pictures in the newspaper that he was holding? Do you think that his degree from Gallaudet University is, they just give them to deaf people without actually educating? I mean, I just think, wow, wow. And they quickly went into their room. We didn't see them the rest of our time. But see, I get more excited and riled up about this than he does. He comes back in the room, and I interpreted. They were still there. I'm like, "They just asked if you could read." And they're like, "You're telling him?" Sorry. I mean, you know, if you want to, of course, I'm going to interpret what your stupidity is. I'm sorry. I'm just going to do it, okay? So we're going to skip through this. Oh, one good thing I wanted to say is I would say in the last 5-10 years, there's been a huge rise in self-advocacy groups. The National Association for the Deaf, Abused Deaf Women's Advocacy Services, and an increase in deaf-specific ASL college programs. So my friend who was teaching Shakespeare at California School for the Deaf actually moved to Austin, Texas, which was her hometown, and started the deaf program at Austin Community College. And they now have like 15 classes that they teach purely in ASL for deaf community members as their associate's degree. So then they can go on to Rochester or Gallaudet or any university with an interpreter and continue on for their bachelor's degree. And it's really awesome. Very exciting. Last thing, ASL is not universal. I get asked that a lot, and I think the easiest thing to say back is, why not? Well, is there a spoken universal language? Of course that would be easier, but think about that language is part of a community and a culture. It's the people who are involved in that culture, right? So, of course there's not a universal sign language. That's just not the way that it is. I I had some more that I wanted to talk about, but I'm not going to because I'm sure you guys have some questions. There's just some etiquette kinds of things, and I'd be happy to share that with you later. One thing I will say about use of an interpreter, and this is an interpreter for anyone who uses a different language. You know, don't say, can you tell him? You know, don't look at the interpreter when you're talking. Look at the person you're talking to. And just speak normally, right? Because that person's job, as we're seeing really great exemplars here, is to translate my language into his language. And they're professional and they're certified and they do an awesome job. So let them do their job, right? So I'll open this now for questions that you may have. You could ask me questions. The whole reason Corey came today was to hopefully, if you hadn't met a deaf person before or been exposed to deaf culture, to give you an opportunity to have that and to answer any questions that you guys may have. So, yes, Alex, sorry. Sitting next to Alex, so. Romeo.
I was actually just wondering how, as far as like, who pays essentially when you have somebody who's in a, like in a university or in an office, like who pays for virtual installations? Is that covered by insurance or?
Well,
Go ahead.
well, for the office, so there's a number of people in the office. There's a list that they can provide an interpreter. So for corporate offices, that's how they provide interpreters. There's a lot of legality in that.
I think one thing that maybe as you guys were switching you missed is Corey was saying that it depends on the number of people in a company in terms of the legality, right? So very small corporations, he's worked in small companies that don't provide interpreting services at all because of the number of employees that it has. He actually works for a very large firm now. He doesn't have an interpreter with him all the time. You want to explain?
So it tends to be with interpreters. If there's a large group or a large meeting, something like that, if it's a one-on-one, I don't need an interpreter to be there with me. I'll lip read or we'll take notes, write back and forth, and that's kind of how we communicate. But if there's a group of 2 or 3, then I do decide that I should use an interpreter.
So to kind of get to your question, who pays for it? It's the law. I mean, in terms of accessibility. So an employer understands that if they're hiring a deaf person, those are their obligations. So of course, in this kind of an economy, it makes it very hard for deaf individuals who are highly skilled to get jobs because the company's bottom line is viewing the cost of interpreters and things like that.
Yeah, and I also have a story. I went to the dentist one time, and before I went, I had requested an interpreter. So they asked me all of these questions about it. Who is going to pay? And I said, you have to pay. I don't have to pay. And you know, the law says that you have to. And so we kind of had a long discussion about it for a pretty long time. I finally had to convince them to do it. And after I went to the dentist and it was all done, I sat down and I had a conversation with them.
They wanted me to come the next one without an interpreter.
And I said, no, the law states that you have to have one. So I just decided just to leave that dentist because of all those issues that came up. So you can just think of the needs that a deaf individual needs.
So again, those are medical service for sure, but you get a lot of resistance for people who are unfamiliar with the law. So for example, both times this happened when I was pregnant. Both times we had to fight. I actually had my children by cesarean, and the second time I was like completely knocked out because of complications I won't go into. But we had to fight both times with the hospital to provide interpreters because I know sign language. Oh, in the middle of labor, I'll be interpreting for my deaf husband because he's not the patient, so they shouldn't have to provide the interpreter. What? Yeah, that didn't happen. But because I know the law, we know the law, and we're very strong advocates. That didn't happen. And you can imagine what happens to many people who are not familiar with their rights. Other folks?
What accessibilities would you like to see become more available? And what accommodations would you like to see that are not around us today currently?
I mean, I hope that everyone could sign. That'd be nice.
Other questions?
I'm going to work through this as I'm saying it. So with people who are hard of hearing that are like have a mild loss and are born to hearing parents, and then the family, you know, is choosing to have them speak because, you know, they want to share their culture, English
Absolutely.
or what have you, with them. Is there, because there's such a stigma in the hearing world for people with hearing loss, like even just people who are, you know, head for
Cochlear implants?
Good.
Amplification,
No.
hearing aids?
Audífono. What is it called?
Hearing aid.
Yes. What was I saying? So I guess what I'm asking is, like, is there any accepted, like, there's a stigma on the hearing side towards these people. Is there a stigma also on the deaf side towards these people because they're, you know, like they never learn ASL and they're kind of living in the hearing world?
You better answer that one.
So yes, I mean, we have hierarchies in every community and every society, right? So I would say that that was one of the first things that I noticed when I got to Gallaudet. I just thought, oh, deaf community, done, same. You know, that's when you don't know a culture, that's sometimes what you can feel. It's very strongly hierarchical. So like kind of at the top of the hierarchy are what we call deaf of deaf. And that means people who are deaf of deaf parents or generations of deaf parents. And, you know, we were talking about reading before, and, you know, ironically, you would maybe think it's people with hearing parents who have the best reading skills. It's not. It's deaf of deaf of deaf who have the best written English skills. Why do you think? Language. They have a language base to start from. So anyway, the top of the kind of hierarchy is that. And then probably, you know, people who maybe have hearing parents who recognized ASL's importance in deaf culture, and they're very fluent since the time they were children. And then under that, I mean, so it keeps moving down. So one of the first people that I met when I got to Gallaudet, and really, he was my best friend, and he really helped me because he was mainstreamed his whole life. And so he came to ASL and deaf culture late, very late. And he was often given a very hard time for that. And you think, why? Why? That wasn't his choice, that was his parents' choice. But if you know anything about minority cultures or oppressed cultures, we know that cultures that are oppress within themselves, right? So he would sometimes have a harder time than I would as a hearing person who didn't know ASL, because I was just kind of ignored. But he would have a struggle with people who were very hierarchical. So I guess I would say that I've encountered many people who are adults who arrived to the deaf community late in life, who grew up mainstreamed or oral, and they fit in a different rung of the hierarchy, but it doesn't mean the community's not welcoming or open to them, right? Corey actually went back and forth between residential and mainstream programs when he was a kid. He grew up in California, in Berkeley, and Berkeley's where the first residential school was, and so he went to that school. And then when it moved to Fremont, his mom took him out and mainstreamed him. And the interpreter was his best friend, right? And finally, he threw his hearing aids out the bus window and said, "I'm deaf, get over it." And he went back to Fremont and joined again the deaf culture. So I met Corey in my second year because he was more capital D deaf than my other friend, so to speak, and my ASL skills were at a place where kind of his community, I felt more comfortable with than.
So the reason we talk about deaf schools is you have a friend who lives in Berkeley. Is that Berkeley? I was with those friends for a while, and then when I was engaged.
Do you mind? Okay. So his best friend was deaf growing up. Go ahead. And my best friend was deaf growing up, and even though I was mainstream, we remained deaf all through it. And so I was perceived as hard of hearing when I first went back because I had been mainstreamed. Then when I went to Gallaudet, I found out more about the different communities. I became more skilled in ASL. I became more involved in deaf culture. But he said he's speech read, or does speech reading, and that I always like to explain really quickly that speech and speech reading are two completely different skills, and I actually know how to teach them. I was trained in how to teach speech reading. So oftentimes, even though he was mainstreamed and has spoken language skills, Corey is not going to speak to you because what are you going to do back? Speak back. And speech reading is a very different skill. I always talk about it's the difference between being the high school basketball player and Michael Jordan. Like something's inside that I can't teach. And so so speech reading and speech skills are not necessarily where you fit in the hierarchy, I would say, but they can influence who you interact with, I guess I would say. Okay.
I'm curious as to what it was like raising your kids as bilinguals, and also like what their perspectives are in this world right now.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they sign.
My son, our son,
Well, yeah. He's picking up, but our daughter,
Nora.
Nora, our daughter, but she's really fluent. She has no problems. But then sometimes, part of it is my fault too, because I'll speak sometimes, and then they get used to speaking often. So because that's what happened when I was growing up. So with my daughter, with her, she's fluent, but when we're all together, we really rely on my wife. But there's a lot of system coming with me, and it's not a problem. But with my daughter, we really taught her early, and she picked it up, no problem. So it was good. I mean, it's fun interacting with them.
Yes, she has to. Children identify as CODAs, and CODA means child of a deaf adult. So when we think about that hierarchy, actually, from a hearing community perspective, you can be involved in the deaf culture and in that hierarchy. Me, I have, as I said, some credentials that I can feel confident in my membership, so to speak, in the deaf community. But my children actually will be viewed even higher because they're children of deaf adults. And so they are born into the culture.
So my niece and nephew they're pretty young, and they have cochlear implants. And I always look at them like they are deaf. When their devices are off, that's who they are. They're deaf. Their father and mom wants them only to really learn spoken English. But whenever I'm around, I teach them as much ASL as I know. And my nephew is actually in a class where he's learning ASL and English, which is great. But I know that kids that have cochlear implants, they don't really fit into the hearing world, and they don't fit into the deaf culture world either. So when I teach them sign language or use sign language with them, I guess I'm trying to get them ready for their choices later on. So is there anything that people can do or educators can do to help them fit more into the deaf culture or the hearing? Obviously speech is for the hearing culture, but
Can I answer? Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm obviously like chomping at the bit, right? This is the story of our lives. So anyway, yes, you're so right. They like ride that fence, right? Cochlear implants were just starting to come to Gallaudet when we were there, and I will say they were not very welcome. You know, the intent of cochlear implants, from most medical perspective, is really to eradicate deafness. Okay, so I don't think a community is very open to the notion that someone wants to eradicate them, right? So it was very hard, I think, for earlier cochlear implant users to become part of deaf culture. That's not really the case anymore. Having said that, I think that most of the deaf adults that I know and deaf community members wish that hearing culture viewed cochlear implants just like amplification. If your niece and nephew could take off their cochlear implant and still have a language and a visual spatial language, and then use that as that skill I was talking about, like we see people use amplification, awesome. It's not that deaf people are against cochlear implants. They're against the notion that babies are implanted. We have no long-term research about the psychological and social effects of cochlear implants, because all of the outcome studies, what are they investigating? Speech. That's it. That's it. So we don't understand like the psychological ramifications of basically through this surgery telling your child that you are broken and we need to fix you, right? And then they have a cultural identity issue as they get older, because many of them don't want to be part of hearing culture, and they take off that cochlear implant, but they have the same struggles I was talking about before for people who are mainstream, because maybe they weren't exposed to ASL or a deaf culture perspective early in life, and it's hard, and it can become really hard. Having said that, we know technology is really improving. And so people asked us a lot if we would have given cochlear implants to our kids when they were born. No. Like, there would be no reason in my mind. Having said that, maybe later in life, if you want to use that as a skill and you make the choice to do that, and you have a language base, fine. Fine.
And also, the important thing is allowing them to choose, really. They decide for themselves, allowing them to have those options themselves and not limiting them. That's my philosophy, at least.
You're signing as you're talking.
I know. I was doing bad.
Is that, are you able to accomplish an ASL, or do you feel that's more?
It's not ASL. I mean, it's impossible. It's a good question. Why am I doing it now where I wouldn't before? It's impossible to be ASL when you're SimComming, right? But having said that, he knows my SimComm well from all of the times that we've been in hearing environments and I've interpreted and spoken and signed for myself. So I didn't want to do the presentation that way, but we had decided before that for this part, for questions and answers, then I would just sign for myself.
Do you think that would work well if you were out in public and ran into people, you know, and you didn't know how to speak ASL, but you used some signs?
Sure. Like I say, communication is key, right? I mean, I think that again and again and again, there has never been a time in the 18 years we've been together that if someone approaches us and tries to communicate, maybe they remember, people know finger spelling from kindergarten. I mean, we hear that all the time. I learned finger spelling in kindergarten and I remember it still, right? So they'll come up and they'll finger spell to us. And there's never a time that's not appreciated. Well, maybe like in the middle of a nice anniversary dinner. But other than that. Yeah, sorry. I know we went over, guys.
So as a hearing person attending Gallaudet University, did you have to do anything extreme to get your assignment, or how long did it take you to accept?
Good question. So sign names, name signs are actually, they're not just something you're given, like you can't give it to yourself, right? It's a cultural identification. And so oftentimes you need to be immersed in the culture for a long time before a deaf person will give you a sign name, right? So actually I got my sign name when I went and worked at Kindle Elementary School, which is a deaf elementary school in DC that's adjacent to Gallaudet's campus, and all the kids are deaf or hard of hearing. And so they gave me the name sign Amy. But my name is so short that most people wouldn't say I need a name sign, but you know, I had lots of little kindergartners running up to me, which is awesome. Corey's name sign, well, he has a goatee now. When I met him, actually one of my roommates always talks about that she remembers braiding it. So remember, he's from Berkeley. So Corey is kind of an identifier for his goatee. Oh, I'll tell you one more. My daughter Nora, this is actually the sign for Bug, but that's what we called her when she was a baby. We called her Bug. So still, I mean, it doesn't, so it's not iconic, and it's not necessarily like your name, right? It's not like Amy, or, you know what I mean? That's the A.
I was named Goat for a long time. My name is Billy, and so all
Yeah.
my deaf friends would making fun of me and say, oh, we should name you Goat, and it just stuck. So
That's awesome.
of course, now I'm a professional. I don't use that.
My best friend Noah, his name sign was Noah, because this is a sign for Jewish, and he's Jewish. So, you know, that's the past at that time. Today, it would probably be a different name sign. My son, his name sign is Lane, L on the side of your mouth, because when he was a baby, he just laughed all the time. And he was a laughing baby, so we gave him the name sign that fit his personality. I think we're done.
Is that it?
One more?
Oh, well, so your name sign must have changed because you didn't have that as a child.
So yeah, before it was Corey on the hand here. So you know, a person they signed something, I would copy it. So I mean, I just copied it. I didn't really create it myself or anything. I didn't really identify myself with that, but or any behavior identified with that sign. It was just kind of given arbitrarily, and then later it changed. So.
Well, thank you for your attention and audience today. I do want to leave you with one last thing, and that is just again to emphasize, I am a member of the hearing community. I will always be a member of the hearing community, and I think that it's fine to be hearing and recognize the challenges and you know, the accomplishments of another culture. And so I don't want you to leave feeling like, wow, you know, for an hour and a half she just talked about how hard it is to be a deaf community member and it's hearing people, you know's perception. That's not my intent. My intent is to just give you exposure so you can understand the cultural perspective of people who are in that community and why maybe you will have the interactions that you have with members of that community. And I always think that that's really enlightening to understand a different perspective. So I hope that that's what you leave with. Thanks for coming. Thanks.